Welcome, everyone. I'm Daniel Joseph, and by the grace of God, we are still on the corner Fringe. Thank you for joining me today. I want to wish everyone a very happy holiday. Tonight marks the first night of the Feast of Hanukkah, this amazing 8-day celebration that is all about liberty and freedom. It's about the cleansing of the temple and God's mercy in restoring his people. I love Josephus as he comments on this festival. He calls it the Festival of Lights, and he gives the definition as to why it is called the Festival of Lights. And what he says is because this liberty beyond our hopes has appeared to us. I mean, that it pierces the heart in such a powerful way. This liberty beyond our hopes, meaning we were looking at an impossible situation. We should have been destroyed. We were distraught. We were in total despair, beyond being consoled. And yet God shone his face upon us. God had mercy upon us. And you can't help but think about, when you start talking about the Festival of Lights, to think about the light of the world. And that is the Messiah, Yeshua, who brings light into us, brings light into us at being the temples of God. And by so doing, we are able to give light to others, and we are cleansed through him. And so, in regard to this festival, it is so much about him. Well, today I actually want to talk a little bit about this festival. In light of current events, and we'll even look at a few headlines today as well, but in light of what we see happening in the world today, we need to remember the story of Hanukkah, because we are reliving it. In a very real sense, there's so many aspects of what happened in the 2nd century BC that we are living today. And so to help capture this, I'm just going to share just a few passages out of the Apocrypha, out of the book of Maccabees, that tells the story. And I think you're just going to appreciate this. I hope so anyways. But let's take a look at this. In 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 41, we read the following. Then the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and that all should give up their particular customs. Now, I just want to stop here real quick. And so here you have this call for all to become one. And this is one of the things I talked about in the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, how when you're in the end of days, when you're at the end of the age, one thing you can expect the Antichrist, the spirit of the Antichrist, to do is to do exactly what we are reading right now. He is going to go forth, and he's going to, like we see happening today, and to accumulate the world for them, to get them all to become one, to come down with the same heart, with the same mind, to do the work of the devil. And here you have Antiochus Epiphanes, who is literally the very image of the Antichrist. He is the Antichrist that Daniel prophesied of. And he came and fulfilled exactly what Daniel said he would. And so here you have this Antichrist figure going out, calling the world to become one. And in the process, you have to give up certain aspects of your lifestyle that you're accustomed to. Interesting, as we see this happening today. But then it goes on, all the Gentiles accepted the command of the king. And so we see the effect when you get into the end times and the spirit of Antichrist comes out, the Gentiles are going to fold. The unbelievers are just going to fold. And so all the Gentiles accepted the command of the king. Many, even from Israel, gladly adopted his religion. They sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. Did you get that? Many from Israel gladly adopted his religion. This is where things get terrifying, and this is what I've been talking about for several weeks. Whether in the Horsemen or even in last week's message, Paul warns us that in the latter times, men will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. This is what we see happened in the story of Hanukkah. And make no mistake about it, we will see it today. And nay, I say we are seeing it. Let me just drop back into chapter 1 and just for a moment, and then we'll continue. But I want to run back to verse 11 in chapter 1. Listen to what this says. In those days, certain renegades came out from Israel and misled many, saying, "Let us go and make a covenant with the Gentiles around us. For since we separated from them, many disasters have come upon us." This proposal pleased them, and some of the people eagerly went to the king, who authorized them to observe the ordinances of the Gentiles. So they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem. You want to talk about wicked, according to the Gentile custom, and removed the marks of circumcision and abandoned the holy covenant. They joined with the Gentiles and sold themselves to do evil. The one thing I want to highlight in this passage that I struggle with the reality of this taking place is that many Jews went out and misled their brothers, saying, "Listen, hell has come upon us. We're experiencing these unfortunate things in life. Our life is difficult right now. Therefore, what we need to do is to concede to the Gentiles. We need to concede to their ways, to their culture, to their custom. We need to abandon our ways for their ways." Now, to do that, you have to compromise the commandments of God. And yet many, it says many, from Israel, this is within the body of God's chosen people, went out and deceived their own brethren. You know, it's one thing for Gentiles to go out, and as we'll read about in this story, this is what Antiochus does. It's one thing to read that the world puts the pressure on the people of God. It's another thing when you have false prophets rising up, false teachers rising up and going forth and misleading many. And so this is what we can expect as we live in these days. Now, continuing on, going back to our passage. King sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the towns of Yehudah. He directed them to follow customs strange to the land, and to forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices, drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane Sabbaths and festivals, to defile the sanctuary and the priests, to build altars and sacred precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice swine and other unclean animals, and to leave their sons uncircumcised. They were to make themselves abominable by everything unclean and profane, so that they would forget the law and change all the ordinances. He added, "And whoever does not obey the command of the king shall die." So here you have this situation. He's putting pressure on them that, hey, you don't do this, you're going to die. And so there's fear, there's intimidation. And what is he looking to do? I mean, the ultimate goal of the Antichrist is get you to compromise your allegiance to God. And how do we show our allegiance to God? It's through his commandments. It's by listening to his voice and not the voice of strangers. And so here we are today. We're living in a day and an age where obviously pornography is running rampant. We have a very, very perverse outlook on marriage. It is not a biblical model whatsoever. We are killing our unborn children at exponential rates. We have all these things, and all of these things are being promoted. And this is globally. It's not just in this country. It's being promoted all over the place. But in recent events, we now have this, what is known as this vaccination, this COVID-19 vaccination that is coming out. And this is, and I keep saying this, it's being heralded as the medical Messiah, as the Savior of the world. We can live, we can be assured of life if we take this vaccination. and certainly not just save our own life, but we're going to save the lives of others as long as we take this vaccination. Now, isn't it interesting that this vaccine is being released, is being brought to market during the festival of Hanukkah? Now, I don't care what you say, that you may think that this is just some really interesting coincidence, or that this is some wild nut job conspiracy trying to demonize this great savior of the world known as the COVID-19 vaccination. There's no way you can paint that picture. You'll never convince me of that. Isn't it fascinating that this vaccine is being released? Let me take it a step further. Let me read to you a headline that pertains to Israel. This is the headline. Israel to get first batch of Pfizer coronavirus vaccines on Thursday. And obviously Thursday night is the first day of Hanukkah. It's so concerning to me that there are many, again, emphasis on many, in Israel that are not just gladly adopting this, but encouraging others to embrace this. And so they're very, very much looking forward to the vaccination. The problem I have with this, and I understand today, this is the most hotly debated thing I know of. Do we take the vaccine? Don't we take the vaccine? There's debate over what's really in the vaccine, what's really not in the vaccine. There's debate over wearing masks and social distancing. I mean, we could go on and on and on. We are living in a chaotic world that has been this world has been flipped upside down because of this, global pandemic. And you know what it's doing? It's not just stressing the world. It's not just putting stress, there's no doubt in my mind, the spirit of Antichrist is behind all of this. It's putting a lot of stress on the church. And in doing so, when you apply pressure, then we find out what we're really made out of. Then we find out, what do we really believe? What is it we really believe? And there's a lot of people that are drowning in fear and in confusion right now. And I got to tell you, every day you turn on the TV, every time you look at an article online, whether it's through Google, whether it's on Facebook, whatever, we are seeing more and more people come out saying anyone who speaks against the vaccination is providing disinformation. Anyone who says it's not safe is misinformed. Anyone who says the science is not there for the mask, that is disinformation. I mean, it's habitual. It's this relentless onslaught of hitting people. And there are many Christians, I'm telling you this, there are many Christians right now buying into this that are going to be first in line when it comes to getting this vaccine. And that is a massive concern for me. I am really troubled. I am really concerned by the lack of discernment that exists with so many Christians that we care for. And they really believe that this is the answer to show other people love. And they're not just going to take it for themselves, but they want to look for the well-being of others. And yes, I absolutely appreciate, that's a biblical text. Love your neighbor as yourself. We're to put the interest of others above our own. No debate about that principle. It's the application of that principle is where we can start to have a debate. In other words, by you taking the vaccine, are you applying the love your neighbor as yourself? Or to take that vaccine, are you having to compromise your integrity and morals, biblical morals, as given in Scripture? See, you know that you're not truly loving your neighbor as yourself if, in fact, you have to compromise what God has commanded you. How you would love your neighbor is by holding fast to that. And it's painful to see that Israel is just headlining this, that they are embracing and they're going to great lengths to acquire so many doses so quickly and to give this to the population. And even many Orthodox are going to be on board with this. You know, there's a thing in Orthodox Judaism known as pikuach nefesh, which just simply means to save a soul. And the concept, and I will by no means come full circle on explaining, how Orthodox Judaism understands pikuach nefesh. But the principle is this, that there are certain situations where breaking a commandment of God can be legitimized and should be broken when it saves a life. Now, I guarantee you, people are going to be putting this pikuach nefesh, as understood by many rabbis, into play in regard to the vaccine, even if they know, even if that vaccine contains swine, pork, pig, if it contains that, or the blood of an animal, whatever, if these cells are involved, they will still take it, and they can do it through this concept of pikuach nefesh. And there's even, Talmudically speaking, in tractate, I think it's tractate Yoma, because it's talking about Yom Kippur, that if a pregnant woman smells pork and she's overcome with the desire to eat it, that it is permissible in that situation, because on Yom Kippur, traditionally, pregnant women can eat, because you talk about saving a life. You don't starve a mother, you don't starve a child, an unborn child. And so Talmud even raises this, that in that situation, here you have pikuach nefesh, to saving a life, takes precedence. Disregard the fact of that you're eating pork. Well, it's a fascinating debate today, and let me be clear, not all rabbis are on board with that. However, many are. Okay. And there's different examples I could give of pikuach nefesh that are absolutely sound. I mean, the example I just gave you right now is not biblically fundamentally sound. But if, for instance, if I was to go down the road with, my family's on the way to the church and we seen a house collapsed and there were people inside and we knew that. Well, Shabbat prohibits us from doing any melacha, from doing any work. Okay, we're not supposed to be doing physical labor. And removing all these heavy pieces, spending hours to remove all the rubble so that we can get to the family that's inside that house, that is a proper way to embrace pikuach nefesh, the saving of a soul. Yes, the Shabbat will be violated through hard labor, but yes, that can be justified. And so I give you a positive example to show you that this concept it's a beautiful concept when biblically sound. But the Talmudic principle, or what is the discussion that's spoken of in the Talmud of a pregnant woman eating swine, you'll never convince me of that. That's when you come off the rails. And even in our story, our Hanukkah story, we can see historically Jewish people with the fear of God, with the conviction of His Word, did not give in to that interpretation of pikuach nefesh. Not at all. In fact, let me continue on in chapter 1, and we're going to pick it up in verse 62. But many in Israel stood firm and were resolved in their hearts not to eat unclean food. I mean, it specifically mentions this because the Seleucid army was shoving swine down the throats of Jewish people. They were forcing them to make themselves unclean. Their temples were being defiled. This is what was happening. But there were some in Jerusalem that would not give in to this. And so it goes on, it says, they chose to die rather than to be defiled by food or to profane the holy covenant, and they did die. Now, this goes back, the whole move of Antichrist wants to do this. And what I've been saying, and I'll stand my ground on this, I'm going to stand my ground, especially when I see so many Christians, really flying off the reservation in regard to they're going to be first in line for the vaccine. When I see Israelis, they're going to be pumped full of stuff, and most of them don't know what's in it. And the ones that actually do know these ingredients that are carrying out, move the mRNA aside for a second. The fact that some of these vaccines, and actually the vaccines for COVID, are carrying this mRNA technology, and that's not disputed. Genetic altering technology, which, by the way, isn't this fascinating? Genetically altering things. It is irreversible. Let me read to you a headline. Listen to this headline. This is absolutely incredible. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., why the COVID-19 vaccine should be forbidden and avoided at all costs. For the first time in the history of vaccination, the so-called last generation mRNA vaccines intervene directly in the genetic material of the patient and therefore alter the individual genetic material, which represents the genetic manipulation, something that was already forbidden and until then considered criminal. And, Kennedy's bringing up an aspect here of that. Do you understand that historically this is illegal? But now all of a sudden it's totally fine. Genetic manipulation is totally fine. It goes on and says, even if the media and politicians currently trivialize the problem and even stupidly call for a new type of vaccine to return to normality, this vaccination is problematic in terms of health, morality, and ethics, and also in terms of genetic damage that, unlike the damage caused by previous vaccines, will be irreversible and irreparable. Think about that. And this is what's going to be pumped into the temples of people that God created by the breath of his mouth, who have been called to worship the Lord Yeshua with all their heart, soul, and strength. This is the garbage that's going to be pumped into them, all under the banner of life. This is how you're going to preserve life. This is how you're going to preserve the life of others. This is how we obtain peace. This is how we get back to normalcy. This is how we obtain safety. It's all under the guise of that. Now, keep in mind, this is over something that has less than a 1% mortality rate. We're going to do this. And Israel is going to do this. All these Israelis are going to do this. And it's going to be justified on multiple platforms. I am not going to stop talking about this because every news station you turn on, every time you go to the internet, you even do Google search, you look up everything that's being portrayed on YouTube. It is all that this is the only answer. Everyone needs to do this. Everyone needs to get on board. The propaganda is relentless. It is persuasive. And I know because Christians are struggling with this, and many Christians who were questioning getting it, at the very least questioning getting it, are now on the other side of the track saying, oh yeah, this is going to be totally fine. We've heard people come out and say that, oh, this is not really genetically altering. We had people come out saying, oh, the side effects are fever. That's not a big deal. This is to be expected. This is normal vaccination side effects. We don't got to worry about this. Never mind the ingredients. Never mind what you're putting into your temple. God help us in this generation. But know this, the spirit of Antichrist is moving. We are living Hanukkah all over right now. Unfortunately, we're at the beginning stages of it, where the Antichrist is going out and demanding compromise, where he wants to come in. And what did he do on Hanukkah? He defiled the temple. This is what he did. Now, I want to jump ahead. In chapter 1, And I want to read, that's actually, I think this is chapter 2. But in chapter 2, we read this in verse 15. The king's officers who were enforcing the apostasy came to the town of Modin to make them offer sacrifice. Many from Israel came to them, and Mattathias and his sons were assembled. Then the king's officers spoke to Mattathias as follows: "You are a leader, honored and great in this town, and supported by sons and brothers. Now be the first to come and do what the king commands, as all the Gentiles and the people of Judah and those that are left in Jerusalem have done. Then you and your sons will be numbered among the friends of the king." Oh, get this. "And you and your sons will be honored with silver and gold and many gifts." Isn't that fascinating? So if we concede to your demands, okay, we allow you to defile us, we start eating pork, and we start keeping Shabbat, and we stop gathering in an assembly, then we'll be friends of the king. There'll be peace. Oh, and I'll even reward you. You ever notice, and I'm not even going to put them all because there's so many of them, all these various statements coming out which are recognizing that those individuals that do not get the vaccine, they will be restricted in life. And when I say restricted, I mean hyper-restricted. We're talking about travel restrictions. We're talking about corporate restrictions. There are going to be businesses that are going to be adapting policies to perpetuate this insanity, saying, well, if you don't have that vaccination, one of two things. Number one, you're not going to be able to work here, or you're going to be forced to wear a mask. You're going to be forced to social distance. We're going to quarantine you in a separate area. I'm going to tell you, this stuff, you can mock at this, you can laugh at this, you say, this is ridiculous, none of this is going to happen. Just keep your eyes open. If you don't want to believe me now, just at the very least, put this on the shelf and watch what happens. It just came out last week that John Delaney has this great idea. He was a congressman, and he has an idea of how to implement quickly the vaccination to make sure everyone takes it. Pay them. Give them a $1,500 stimulus check for everyone who gets a vaccination. $1,500 stimulus check. I mean, we just read it. We just said this is exactly what the Antichrist does. Compromise your beliefs, will reward you with gold and silver. Now, I tell you, you cannot make this stuff up. I want to read something to you that I think is really incredible. And the headline is, "Landmark Legal Ruling Finds That COVID Tests Are Not Fit for Purpose." And when this says landmark, it isn't kidding. Listen to what this, because within this article, it talks about these 4 Germans that were illegally quarantined in Portugal. And because one of them tested positive, all 4 were illegally, against their will, held captive. I mean, they were imprisoned in their hotel. They could not leave. They were forced. And so they sued. And what ended up happening was that it went to the court system. They ended up winning. They ended up winning the case that they were illegally quarantined. Because, and obviously one had it, the other 3 didn't, but because they were with them, they all had to suffer. Well, the case centered on the reliability of the test that the individual got. It was the PCR test. And so here you have this individual, he gets tested positive, but as it goes to the courts say basically this test is unreliable. And I'll actually just put this up on the screen. This is the quote. "The deliberation of the Lisbon Appeal Court is comprehensive and fascinating. It ruled that the Azores Regional Health Authority had violated both Portuguese and international law by confining the Germans to the hotel." It goes on and says this. "The conclusion of their 34-page ruling included the following: In view of current scientific evidence, this test shows itself to be unable to determine beyond reasonable doubt that such positivity corresponds, in fact, to the infection of a person by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. In the eyes of this court, then, a positive test does not correspond to a COVID case. The two most important reasons for this, said the judges, are that the test reliability depends on the number of cycles used, and that the test reliability depends on the viral load present. In other words, there are simply too many unknowns surrounding PCR testing. The Portuguese judges cited a study conducted by some of the leading European and world specialists, which was published by Oxford Academic at the end of September. It showed that if someone tested positive for COVID at a cycle threshold of 35 or higher, the chances of that person actually being infected is less than 3%, and that the probability of receiving a false positive is 97% or higher. In other words, you really can't even trust 3% of these tests taken. It doesn't even have a 3% reliability. And yet, all the numbers that are flowing around, we're spiking COVID over here, cases are coming up here, we have unprecedented numbers over here. This is happening all over the country right now. And here, in a case that has actually been determined lawfully in a court of law, we now have this. But do you think you're going to read this headline anywhere? Do you think CNN is going to cover this? Do you think MSNBC, ABC, CBS, well, whoever else, do you think this is going to cover it? Absolutely not. And yet, in a court of law, this is determined it's unreliable. Now, that is a significant piece of information. It's no longer people conjecturing. It's not even scientists coming out and saying, you know what, I have questions about the PCR testing and calling into question, or even quoting the individual who created the PCR test and said it's not made for viruses. But now we have it being established in a court of law. That is wild. And you think about that. Let me read to you another headline that just kind of blows my mind. And this one has gone viral. Johns Hopkins study saying COVID-19 has relatively no effect on deaths, and U.S. spiked after publication. Now you think about that headline, says it all. Conventional wisdom is that COVID-19 has caused thousands of deaths in the United States and nearly 1.5 million worldwide. This perception has been directly challenged by a study published by Johns Hopkins University on November 22nd. Genevieve Briand, Assistant Program Director of the Applied Economics Master's Degree Program at Johns Hopkins University, critically analyzed the impact that COVID-19 had on U.S. deaths. According to Briand, the impact of COVID-19 on deaths in the United States can be fully understood by comparing it to the number of total deaths in the country. According to the study, in contrast to most people's assumptions, the number of deaths by COVID-19 is not alarming. In fact, it has relatively no effect on deaths in the United States. But you wouldn't think that by watching the news. Continuing, after retrieving data on the CDC website. Now, that's what blows my mind. Where is this Briand getting the information? Right from the CDC. Can't make this up. Briand compiled a graph representing percentages of total deaths per age category from early February to early September, which includes the period from before COVID-19 was detected in the U.S. to after infection rates soared. Surprisingly, the deaths of older people stayed the same before and after COVID-19. Since COVID-19 mainly affects the elderly, experts expected an increase in the percentage of deaths in older age groups. However, this increase is not seen from the CDC data. In fact, the percentages of deaths among all age groups remain relatively the same. According to Briand, the reason we have higher number of reported COVID-19 deaths among older individuals than younger individuals is simply because every day in the U.S., older individuals die in higher numbers than younger individuals. Analysts of deaths per cause in 2018 revealed that the pattern of seasonal increase in the total number of deaths is a result of the rise in deaths by all causes, with the top three being heart disease, respiratory diseases, influenza, and pneumonia. This is true every year, explained Brienne. Every year in the U.S., when we observe the seasonal ups and downs, we have an increase of deaths due to all causes. Now listen to this. This is where this article gets really interesting. When Brienne looked at the 2020 data during that seasonal period, COVID-19 related deaths exceeded deaths from heart diseases. This was highly unusual since heart disease has always prevailed as the leading cause of deaths. However, when taking a closer look at the death numbers, she noted something strange as Brienne compared the number of deaths per cause during the period of 2020 to 2018. She noticed that instead of the expected drastic increase across all causes, there was a significant decrease in deaths due to heart disease. Even more surprising, as seen in the graph below, this sudden decline in deaths is observed for all other causes. The study found that the trend is completely contrary to the pattern observed in all previous years. In fact, the total decrease in deaths by other causes almost exactly equals the increase in deaths by COVID-19, which again, okay, so you think about that article, and really what it's saying is okay, we've spiked the COVID deaths. I guess people die of getting hit by a bus, and we're calling that COVID deaths. And the thing about it is they're recognizing now that, yeah, we spike and we said all these deaths happen in COVID, except nobody else is dying of these other diseases anymore. None of it makes sense. But when you look at the numbers accurately, what you find is COVID has almost zero impact on the death rate over the years. And that is significant. And that goes back to looking at this rate of this mortality rate, which has, it sounds so crazy every time you say it. It has a 99% plus survival rate. And these numbers that Brienne gets from the CDC prove that. But again, we don't want to talk about these. We want to talk about how everyone's going to die, and you're never going to be able to take your mask off, and you're never going to be able to see your family again. You're never going to be able to have a Christmas again. Do you think it's a coincidence? They're shutting everything down at the time that means the most to Americans. Thanksgiving and at Christmas, or we would for us Hanukkah. No, you can't be with friends. You can't be with family. You can't do this. And hitting people where it hurts the most. All of these things being implemented, and make no mistake, it is for a reason. This is absolutely for a reason. It's all about getting the vaccine. I'm telling you right now, Satan is motivated to make sure he can come in during the festival of Hanukkah and do what he did in the 2nd century BC. Come in and defile the temples of God. Which temple you are. Let me read this headline to you. Top pathologist claims coronavirus is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public. He says, there is utterly unfounded public hysteria driven by the media and politicians. It's outrageous. This is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public. The article goes on and says this: Hodgkinson remarked that social distancing is useless because COVID is spread by aerosols which travel 30 meters. We're talking like 100 feet or so before landing. As he called for society to be reopened immediately to prevent the debilitating damage being caused by the lockdowns. Now, if you, and we've talked about the Great Barrington Declaration. Well, that thing has snowballed into roughly almost 50,000 doctors signing on. It went from 6,000 to almost 50,000. I mean, we're talking about epidemiologists, pathologists, virologists, MDs of all natures signing on to this to immediately end the lockdowns, because the lockdowns are having far greater casualties and doing far greater harm to society, both health and obviously financially. Now, continuing on in this article, Hodgkinson also slammed mandatory mask mandates as completely pointless. Masks are utterly useless. There is no evidence here for their effectiveness whatsoever. It's utterly ridiculous. Seeing these unfortunate, uneducated people, I'm not saying that in a pejorative sense, seeing these people walking around like lemmings, obeying without any knowledge base to put the mask on their face. I mean, we could go on and on and on. I mean, it doesn't matter. Isn't it interesting? It doesn't matter how many responsible epidemiologists, MDs, pathologists, virologists, all these experts come out and say that this is insanity. Somehow, none of their voices matter, and all of their voices are nothing but disinformation. And they're scrubbed from the web. I mean, this is absolutely bonkers. We are living in the days of Hanukkah, and the Antichrist is persuasive. He knows how to intimidate. He knows how to implement fear, as we see is happening right now. This is the time that you want to be of a sound mind, that you want to cling to the commandments of God more than ever before. Do not falter in this measure. Be encouraged, because I want you to look at how Hanukkah ended out. He gave victory to his people who repented, to those people that loved him, that wanted to serve him, and that were willing to die for him. And therefore, we have this amazing festival, the Festival of Lights, which, again, Josephus tells us the meaning of this, or why it's called the Festival of Lights. It's called that because our liberty beyond our hopes has appeared. Liberty beyond all hope had appeared. And what a blessed promise. That's the promise we have in Yeshua. And if we keep our eyes on the prize, if we keep our eyes on him, loving him, serving him, he will navigate this for us. You will have a shalom in the midst of chaos. You will have a peace that surpasses all understanding, that can conquer the fleshly fear you're going to experience. And every one of us are confronted with fleshly fear. But it's our love and our allegiance that gives us the strength to overcome that fear. And so with that said, I just want to end it here. I want to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah. Be thinking about this story in light of what you are experiencing this year with this pandemic. With that said, bless you and